This is another MaltaToday interview. Today I have Mark Portelli, CEO of MIDI PLC, the company that was granted a concession to develop Tinia Point and Manoel Island. Mark, thank you for accepting this interview.
Good morning.
Basically, it's obvious why I am here today. There is a campaign, an ongoing campaign currently, collecting signatures in a petition for government to take back Manoel Island and turn it into a national park. Now, obviously, MIDI PLC has a commercial interest on the island. It was granted a concession, part of the Tinia Manoel Island concession, to develop luxury residences and other facilities on the island. Part of that commitment as well was to restore the historical buildings on Manoel Island.
Correct.
But before proceeding to the current petition and the campaign that is ongoing, I'd like to know at what stage has the Manoel Island part of the concession, the project, at what stage has it arrived?
So, yes, I mean, in terms of the development, it hasn't been without problems. The planning process is probably now in its 8th year. We initially started with a master plan which was developed by Foster and Partners. That master plan went before the planning board and was approved. During the process of the application, we undertake also an environmental impact assessment. That environmental impact assessment had highlighted potential risks on the site. So together with the SCH, we agreed that we would carry out some archaeological investigations. Those archaeological investigations basically did yield sites of archaeological interest. Those sites were, together with the SCH, we continued to uncover them extensively. That took a good part, I would think 4 to 5 years we've been ongoing. Those archaeological digs have been ongoing. And it was quickly determined that the master plan or the outline development permit, which we had, would no longer be able to be pursued. We had to go back to the drawing board. This must have been 2021. We had to go back to the drawing board in order to redesign the master plan, to take account of the archaeological finds, and in order to ensure those were preserved. That resulted in a major reduction in the development, and we then went back to the planning board with a fresh outline development application. That application was eventually approved. Unfortunately, it was appealed, and that appeal process took the best part of 18 months to resolve. Eventually, it went right up to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal found that the basis of appeal was unfounded. Again, that did cost us time, and that time, we are still looking to recover.
All right. Now, one of the arguments being raised is, listen, this concession, Tinia Manoel Island, was granted way back in 2000,
Correct.
Following years prior to that of discussions between the government. In fact, Francis Zami de Mac once said this was a project that materialized under 3 different administrations. Negotiations started under one, continued under the other, finally being signed under a different administration. Manoel Island, however, while Tinia has been developed, the actual project on Manoel Island has not yet taken off in terms of the construction that was being prospected over here. And an argument being raised is, listen, 25 years ago when this concession was granted, Malta was at a particular socio-economic stage of its development. The governments at the time were seeing projects like this as giving a boost to the economy. 25 years later, that scenario has changed. Is there still need for luxury residences like these? And therefore the claim now is being raised, listen, shouldn't government be taking back the island and transforming it into a public park for this massive conurbation, Sliema, Gżira, Msida, you have 150,000 people living here, thousands more who visit to work, for leisure activities. How do you respond to this?
I mean, in terms of it, there are two sides to the story, of course. So the concession was granted 25 years ago. There's no denying that. But it was always contemplated that it would be a phased development. In fact, the deed of emphyteusis that we have with government contemplates that MIDI had the option at the time to decide where to start, either at Teeny Point or at Manoel Island. 25 years ago, the decision was taken to commence works at Teeny Point. As those works were coming to an end, as I said, circa 8 years ago, if not more, I would say more, 10 years ago, the process in terms of developing or redeveloping the master plan for Manoel Island commenced. And that process was envisaged to take 3-4 years maximum. 10 years later, we're still at a stage where we do not have a full development permit. That full development permit was submitted now plus 2 years ago. It went before the planning board last March. When I say last March, March of 2024. And at the planning board, a decision was taken literally at the public hearing. A decision was taken that it was advisable for a heritage impact assessment to be undertaken. That decision was based on the fact that Manoel Island has now recently been included in the buffer zone for Valletta. Valletta is a World Heritage Site, and in terms of UNESCO policy, my understanding is that it is desirable to have a buffer zone around Valletta in order to protect its World Heritage status. So, rightly so, as it had only just been included, as the proposed buffer zone had only just been published, a decision was taken to undertake this heritage impact assessment. We are currently undertaking this assessment. We're more than a year into it. We have submitted we have submitted the assessment. We got feedback. That feedback, required us to undertake further studies. Those studies have been undertaken and also submitted. So we are confident now that towards, at least within this calendar year, we should be in a position to go back to the planning board in order to determine whether our application for the full development of Manoel Island is approved or not.
Does MIDI have the financial power to go ahead with the project? Because over the years we've heard instances where the consortium was seeking new investors,
yes,
specifically for the Manoel Island.
And we have
project.
There has been a public statement about this in terms of we are in discussions actively with a particular investor, and if those discussions are successfully concluded, we will have the financial means to undertake the project. Yes.
I raise this point because this is one of the points that activists have raised. Listen, MIDI does not seem to have that financial power to bring this to conclusion within a reasonable time frame.
Just to clarify, I mean, in terms of what we wanted to do in terms of in identifying an investor in order to join MIDI on the path in terms of the development of Manoel Island was to find someone who would provide equity. In terms of does MIDI have the finance? MIDI could access that finance independently, but we wanted to ensure that the project was properly capitalized, and by bringing in an investor, we believe that is the best way forward. This process has not been concluded. It would have, as a public company, MIDI would have to issue a company announcement and seek shareholder approval for such a transaction. This transaction has not been concluded, but we are working actively to conclude it.
Now, activists are saying, listen, March next year, in March 2026, according to the lease agreement, the arrangement that had been agreed, the project should be substantially concluded.
Correct.
Now, as things stand, this is unlikely to materialize by March next year. And you are currently in negotiations with the government to have that deadline extended.
according to the activists.
Yeah. Now this is where I'm asking you. Let's start with the deadline, March 2026. I mean, this project will definitely not be substantially concluded, even if the permit is issued within the next couple of months. So, what is exactly MIDI discussing with the government?
So before, in terms of where are we and what is what is the deadline? The March. In actual fact, it's March 2023. So it's happened 2 years ago now. The deadline was breached 2 years ago, and not March 26. The deed provides a cure period of 3 years within which MIDI can rectify its failings or perceived failings without breaching the contract or the deed of emphyteusis. But in reality, what the activists or what the people making this claim are failing to explain as well, or failing to understand because it's been explained to them, or choosing not to understand, is that the deed includes automatic provisions for the extension of that deadline. The provisions are very clear and they cover a number of points. Firstly, any delays associated with the issue of building permits. Secondly, specifically, and I'm not sure if it was contemplated at the time, but specifically delays associated with archaeological finds. And thirdly, any delays which are beyond the control of MIDI. So we have very well documented instances where these delays have been, of the delays encountered, and the extension date is automatically extended without the need to negotiate. That completion date is automatically extended. MIDI enjoys the deed of emphyteusis that MIDI enjoys is for 99 years, which commenced in 2000. The 2023 deadline being referred to is a substantial completion date for the entire project. And that substantial completion date deadline does shift automatically to compensate MIDI for any delays it's encountered with respect to the 3 points I mentioned.
So are there any current negotiations with the government ongoing?
The reality is that the negotiations with government relate to the archaeological finds, because the archaeological finds, the deed provisions make reference to adjustments, which the deed has to be adjusted to take account of those archaeological finds. And those archaeological finds now having been defined and the impacts are now known, the deed would have to be amended to take account of those of the impact of the archaeological finds. Yes.
So March 2026. What deadline are you looking at in terms of an automatic extension? Is it another 3 years? What's what?
I mean, we've incurred. I explained to you our application was submitted. The process in terms of planning for Manoel Island commenced 10 years ago now. I mean, the clock hasn't stopped. The clock is still on hold because the heritage impact assessment is still being considered. We were sitting in front of the planning board, more than 12 months ago, and we were sent back to undertake another study. And that's what the deed contemplates. The deed contemplates that if MIDI is required to go backwards and forwards in order to undertake its responsibility, its commitment, then that commitment, the time to undertake that commitment is automatically extended. And therefore, given the delays we have sustained, there is plenty of time to undertake the project within the revised completion date.
Let me take you back. 2012, chairman of MIDI, Albert Mitzi. He had been interviewed with the newspaper, and the issue of whether Manoel Island should be returned back to the public was raised in this issue. And Bert Mitzi's reply was, we will have no problem, but obviously government will have to compensate us for any work we've done on the restoration and all that. Does that Is that position still something that MIDI would consider today?
Plus 10 years ago, the circumstances were very different. We had not embarked on the production of the master plan. We had not gone down. We were not incurred, the amount of investment we've already incurred on the site. Things have changed significantly. At that stage, possibly it was opportune to have that discussion, but today certainly, we're far too committed. We're committed to our shareholders. We're committed to our bondholders. It's really a discussion which we cannot have. No.
So no discussion on actually compensation and.
I mean, I'm not going to be drawn into it because compensation is reimbursing for expenses incurred. Is one thing, but compensation I don't think is something which anyone would consider, and I don't think it would. And I know part of the the activists are saying, or the activists graffiti is saying, MIDI should be fairly compensated, and the shareholders should not suffer, etc., etc. It's very idealistic, and in reality, very difficult. It would, in our opinion, it's not possible to implement.
I mean, an argument raised a couple of weeks ago. I was interviewing the graffiti spokesperson who's heading this campaign along with other NGOs, and his argument was almost an appeal to shareholders of MIDI to think of your legacy in terms of how your legacy will be perceived if this transfer of land back to the public would happen. Is that something that MIDI's primary shareholders would consider?
But as a listed entity, people cannot act in their own individual best interest. They must act in the company's best interest. And we have, more than 5,000 stakeholders in terms of bondholders and shareholders. And as a board, we must act collectively in all their interests. And therefore, if Mr. X wishes to, make a gesture, he cannot expect to drag 5,000 other people along with him in order to benefit from that, or in order for him to look good making that gesture. So I don't believe it's the case, no.
All right, but does MIDI see value in the argument being made? Listen, the need for public open space.
Absolutely.
In this conurbation, that's congested and...
Most definitely. So I mean,
has definitely expanded over the last 25 years.
So as I alluded to when we, at the beginning of the discussion, when we encountered the archaeological finds, we had to redesign the master plan entirely, and it results in a development with a much lower impact. In fact, our development meets 80% of the national park status, which the activists, or which graffiti and FAA together with other NGOs are demanding. And why do I say 80%? First and foremost, 60% of the development of the site occupied by MIDI will be developed for public open spaces, fully accessible to the public. So 60% of the site, if we look at the master plan, we have two main areas, which is a 35,000 square meter area, as you come into the site, which spans from the entrance right down to the quay at Lazzaretto, and we have an 80,000 square meter area around the fort, around Fort Manuel, which will be developed into a glassy park, literally a public park. That public park extends right down to the sea. We have access to the sea on the east coast and the north coast, completely unhindered and fully accessible. And Manoel Island, till today, including today in its current state, where it is being actively used for recreational purposes. I mean, I think last year we recorded 240,000 visitors to the island. 240,000 people came into Manoel Island, whether they're walking their dogs, whether they're coming for a picnic, whether they're accessing the foreshore, or simply exercising. So Manoel Island does fulfill that obligations, and our development will fulfill it even further. We have.
Why do you say so?
As I said, 80% of the island is going to be 60% is publicly accessible and for public use. 60% of the concession granted to MIDI will be developed as public open spaces for public use. 20% is occupied by historical buildings. I'm sure nobody is suggesting that we dismantle these buildings to create, great more public spaces. So that's 80% of the site occupied by MIDI. So that means MIDI is occupying for commercial purposes 20% of the site. Out of that 20%, I believe it's 12 of the 20 are open spaces anyway. Private open spaces, but open spaces anyway. And 8% we are putting actually, is the footprint of the buildings on our concession only accounts for 8% of MIDI's concession. But say 20%, including the private open spaces. That means we're delivering 80% of what is being requested. What is actually being requested? That is a public park with public access for the people, for everyone to enjoy, which we are creating. Maybe not, the entire site, but certainly 60% of the site. Access to the foreshore, which we are providing, and that's unhindered and available. Places of relaxation, where people can unwind and exercise. That is what's happening. It's happening today. I mean, if you came...
Will it remain so?
More so. Today there are...
Because one of the fears, understandable, is that the moment you have luxury residences that have been developed there, commercial development, that could impact how the rest of the island then is used. Will the foreshore, will these public open spaces that you're speaking about remain completely accessible to the
Definitely. So, just to clarify, we do not own the foreshore. So the foreshore is excluded from our concession. So that is not MIDI's property. We have an obligation to ensure access over our property to the foreshore is unhindered. And that is an obligation which we will undertake, and which we are undertaking today, and of course we will continue to undertake. The obligation to develop public areas is also included in the deed, and there are safeguards to ensure that those public areas remain publicly accessible and are not gated public areas, that there'd be nothing public about them, if that was the case. So absolutely, there is an obligation. The deed provides for that. We've gone further in order to ensure that safeguards are in place by creating the Manoel Island Foundation, and the foundation acts as guardian to ensure that MIDI is undertaking its obligations. This is a collaboration with the local council, and these, this is something. It's a model which we believe can work. We want it to be we want it to be a vibrant place where people come and enjoy themselves. We said, we don't want it to be, a place where you can hear a pin drop. Far from that.
You did meet the activists.
Yes, we met with Robert.
What was the outcome of that meeting?
No, it was very cordial. I mean, in terms of we understand, it was a very cordial meeting. I mean, there was no outcome per se, in terms of people left with different views. But we both understood where each party was coming from.
You said that hopefully the application at the planning authority would get back on track sometime this year.
With the hope by the end of this year, yes.
So when would you realistically, I mean, let's say this does materialize sometime this year, when would you realistically say the project could kick off?
Immediately after. I mean, there is works, as you came up the road towards the office, there are a number of Jersey barriers which are holding off part of the site. Excavation works have already commenced because we do have a full development permit for the excavation of the site. So excavation works have already commenced. So development works will commence immediately after.
So you're saying that works would commence immediately?
Yes, works have commenced.
All right,
yes.
but because one of the fears is, all right, you'd get the permit, but then there'll be the waiting time.
No, the clock starts. As I said, we have
the clock will start ticking.
We have the benefit of the clock stopping when we encounter delays. But when the permit is issued, the clock starts ticking again. And we're very much aware of the time frame we must undertake the works within, and therefore we will have to start works immediately.
In terms of the business case for such a development,
Yes.
I'm assuming 25 years, that case has changed and changed multiple times.
Yes.
Is there a business case still for such a type of a development?
I believe so, yes. I mean, in terms of, Malta is becoming increasingly popular as a destination, for residency purposes. People are, come here, for a variety of reasons, including, obviously, the climate, most importantly. And, we've been very successful in terms of developing property, especially in the last 10 years at Teeny Point. So if you see our last development, which is currently being undertaken, which we should conclude by the end of this year, I would say I say it's fully sold. We have got 6 apartments out of 60 which remain unsold. So yes, there certainly is the business case.
One final question, Mark. I'll come back to the community. The question of public open space.
Yes.
Now you're saying, listen, we are committed to leave what is being planned as public open space.
Correct.
Open, fully accessible, not gated. Now that is something that you need to convince people that it will remain the case.
Yes. And there's a deed obligation for that to happen.
Because the moment those apartments start going up, it is that fear that kicks in.
Yes.
Even to protect maybe the value of that investment, we start gating off parts of Manoel Island.
So, I mean, if we look at the master plan and you see where the development is focused, the development is focused on the marina side. There are 2 clusters, where we are developing units. As I said, those 2 clusters, together with the cluster on the North Shore, account for 20% of our site. The open spaces within those sites are going to be private for the residents within that 20%, but the remaining 60% open areas are fully public and remain public and will remain publicly accessible. And of course, the 20% occupied by the historical buildings are a given, and they're not going anywhere.
I'm assuming you won't be signing the petition.
No.
Thank you, Mark Portelli, CEO MIDI. This interview stops here. It allows you to see the other side of the story, make your own evaluation. Eventually, it's the people listening to us who will make their own decisions. This interview stops here. This interview and others like it will appear on maltatoday.com.mt and our socials. Thank you for watching.